What's growing on, gardeners? It's Sunday, October 29th, and it is a gorgeous fall morning here on the southeastern coast of North Carolina. And on today's video, I'm going to show you 24 veggies that you can still plant out in your garden right now.
If you're new to the channel, please subscribe and hit the bell to receive new video notifications, and check out our Amazon store and Spreadshop links in the video description for everything I use in my garden and awesome custom designed apparel and other gear. Your support is greatly appreciated.
All of the veggies that I'm listing in this video are tolerant of frost and freeze. Now, I live in Zone 8A, North Carolina, and all of these veggies, for the most part, can be grown out in the open down to Zone 7 with only some minor cover on the coldest nights of the year. However, if you do live in zones that are colder than Zone 7, I'm going to show you some techniques and really easy tricks at the end of this video where you can probably still grow these veggies for the most part throughout a big chunk of the winter, if not all winter long. So stay tuned at the end for some of those tricks. Veggies 1 through 14 are the brassica family of vegetables. All of the brassicas are highly cold tolerant, and there are so many to list. If only I had a little bit of help. Some examples of common plants in the brassica family are arugula, also known as rocket, bok choy and pak choy, broccoli, broccoli rabe, also known as rapini, cabbage, cauliflower, collard greens, kale, kohlrabi, mustard greens, radishes, rutabaga, turnip, watercress. That's probably some of the most common things that you will find, but the list is even longer if you look at the entire family of vegetables. Well, thanks. That was an enormous help. Now I want to break it down for you a little further. While all brassicas, for the most part, share a lot of similar characteristics, especially when it comes to their cold tolerance, you do have to understand how to grow them because some of them do grow a little bit more differently than others. These plants right here are my kale plants, and believe it or not, I planted these late last winter, so they are probably like 9 or 10 months old. And kale are really easy to grow because you can keep picking off the plants for a long period of time. You see, they will get taller and taller and taller, and then you just peel the leaves off when you want more, and then you wait for them to grow back a little bit more, and then you come back and pick them again. So for that reason, in late fall, I only need to sow a handful of new kale plants because my old kale plants are still going to produce throughout the winter. I have some kale plants there, and I have some smaller kale plants right there. So I do have them in different stages of growth, just so I can have some tender leaves there and some larger, more mature leaves over there. But generally speaking, you don't have to plant out a ton of waves of kale. But this methodology is completely different for something like cabbage and broccoli. You'll see right here I have some more advanced cabbage plants that are probably going to start beginning to make heads within the next couple of weeks. I have green cabbage, and then I have purple cabbage that is also pretty far along. But over here, I have smaller cabbage plants, and they are several weeks behind the larger cabbage plants. The same story goes with my broccoli. Here I have some broccoli plants that are getting large, and before I know it, they're going to start producing heads. However, over here, I have some much smaller broccoli plants that are weeks behind. You'll see they are in all different stages of growth. This is called succession planting. Things like broccoli and cabbage, you pretty much harvest at once. You're going to pick one head of cabbage, and then it's going to be gone from your garden. You're going to pick the big crowns of broccoli, and while you may get a few side shoots off a plant, for the most part, your main harvest is all going to be taken at once. So I don't want all of my broccoli and cabbage to give me a harvest all at once within the same week, because I'm not going to know what to do with all of those heads of cabbage and all of those crowns of broccoli. So I like to plant about 6 plants at a time, all in different stages of maturity, so I can harvest them throughout the season instead of getting a huge wave all at once and having nothing for the rest of the year. So always remember to succession plant plants like that so you don't have an overabundance of food and then none at once. Brassicas are awesome because of their incredible diversity within that family of plants. Just yesterday, I sowed 3 rows of collard greens, and I've actually never grown collards before, and I have 3 rows that you can see planted right here. Super easy to grow. A lot of brassicas are good with being direct sown. Veggies 15 and 16 are beets and carrots, and I'm lumping these two together because these are examples of veggies that you need to direct sow into the ground. You do not want to grow them from transplants. And I have some beets that are germinating right here, and they're starting to put on some of their true leaves. And then under this board right here, I have my carrots. Now, carrot seeds have to be sown very shallow on the soil, so if you get any heavy rain, they can wash away. So what I like to do is water the area very well, and then I like to place a wide board on top of them, and then just water on top of the board and keep the general area moist. This will stop the seeds from washing away. Then after about 7 to 10 days, you will lift this board off. You will start to see the carrot seeds have germinated, and then they will thicken up when they get exposed to real sunlight. Now, carrots are going to be one of the easiest things you will ever grow throughout the winter. I grew up in Zone 6B, New Jersey, and my father grew carrots all winter long there without issue. And the best part is, carrots are extremely sweet when they mature in the cold weather. In the heat, they develop more starch than sugar, but in the cold, they develop much higher sugar content. So carrots are simply one of those must-grow things, and again, I recommend planting them out in succession because you don't want all of your carrots to come to maturity at the exact same time. Sow a row or two every week or two. That way you can stagger your harvests. Now, beets, on the other hand, are not quite as cold hardy as carrots. I've found that the beet foliage, the tops, generally take a little bit of burn. The leaves will burn back a little bit when it drops below 25 degrees Fahrenheit. However, as long as your soil doesn't freeze, the bulbs of the beets will do well and the greens will grow back. So for that reason, I'm able to grow them all winter long. If it's going to get cold, they do benefit from a little bit of protection and some kind of mechanism that will keep your soil from freezing. More on that later. Veggie number 17 is lettuce. When it comes to growing lettuce, the time of the year needs to be paired with the variety of the lettuce. It all comes down to timing and variety selection. Let me explain. That's because different varieties of lettuce vary wildly in their tolerance to cold and heat. For example, this giant Caesar variety of romaine lettuce that I absolutely love is quite tolerant of heat here, and I can let it stand out into my garden all the way until May, where most other varieties will start bolting and go to seed. However, it has very limited frost tolerance. Hard freezes will damage the leaves. So for this reason, I actually plant this lettuce in late summer in order to get a big jump start on it because it can handle the late summer warmth, and then I need to harvest it before we start getting the hard freezes. However, this variety of lettuce right here, New Red Fire, is much more cold tolerant. You see, it has a days to maturity of 21 to 55 days. That gives you the flexibility to either harvest them when they're very young and leafy, or you can wait until they form larger heads. And because it is a red lettuce, they are generally much more cold tolerant. So because of that, I actually sowed 5 rows of this variety yesterday in my garden because I know it's going to be able to tolerate the frosts and the hard freezes that the romaine cannot. So when I can no longer grow the nice thick large heads of romaine that take a lot of time and need more solar energy, I will be able to harvest these heads. Then we have one of my favorite varieties of cold season lettuce, that is the Marvel of 4 Seasons. This is extremely tolerant of frost and freeze. This has survived for me unprotected all the way into the upper teens. It is so cold hardy. And the nice thing about this is a heading lettuce. So it's generally very difficult to grow heading lettuces when the sun gets really weak in the winter. And then we have something like red sails. This is a leaf red lettuce. It's going to be one of the most cold hardy lettuces that you're going to be able to grow, and you will plant them out in rows and you'll harvest them in a more cut and come again fashion. And this type of lettuce is much better for zones in higher latitudes where you get really short days during the winter and the sun is pretty weak. Because this is a leaf lettuce, it doesn't need as much solar energy as the heading lettuces do. So this is something that you can grow if you struggle with anything growing in your winters. So right here you'll see that giant Caesar variety of romaine lettuce I was talking about. I planted this out in my garden in September once the bad heat broke, and I'm going to need to harvest this quickly because we are going to start getting frosts. In fact, we're probably going to have a light frost a couple of times next week. So I may actually want to cover them because they are not hardened off to the cold. These romaine are still kind of fragile, and I don't want them to take any leaf damage. So that's why it's so important that when you grow these more summertime oriented varieties of romaine, you keep the cold in mind. But that being said, I love romaine lettuce so much that I'm still going to grow them throughout the winter. I just need to take a different approach. I'm not going to plant them out in the open in my garden. I started some seeds just a few days ago in this pickle pot right here that have not germinated yet, but when they do germinate and they're ready for transplant, I'm actually going to move them out into grow bags, and I'm going to plant them up against the south wall of my house because it stays so warm during the night. It's not unusual for the south wall of my house to be 5 to 7 degrees warmer than out in the open in my garden. So using that trick, I will still be able to grow beautiful romaine lettuce in the wintertime where I can't out in my raised beds. Veggie number 18 is Swiss chard. I've been successful growing Swiss chard out in the open in my garden here every winter that I've lived here in 6 years in North Carolina. And right here you'll see some Swiss chard that I have ready for transplant. I'm going to put these out into my garden very soon. However, Swiss chard like being direct sown, so they're not something that you need to start in transplant trays by any means. In fact, Swiss chard is another thing similar to kale that you can harvest in a cut and come again fashion. Right here you'll see Swiss chard that I planted out last winter. I still have one plant remaining, and the stem on this thing is crazy thick. I mean, look at that stem right there. It is just massive. I can barely fit my whole fist around it. That's how big it is. Now, while Swiss chard is frost tolerant, it is one of the least frost tolerant things that I'm mentioning on this video. Similar to beets, they start taking damage about 25 degrees Fahrenheit, at least in my experience. So if I plant out a whole bunch of Swiss chard in my garden, generally speaking, over the course of the winter, after repeated hard freezes hit them over and over, about half of them will die and half of them will start to grow back in March when it starts warming up again. So I usually have a 50-50 survival death rate if I don't cover them. So for that reason, they will benefit from cover when you do get hard freezes. So if you really love growing Swiss chard, you can grow it in the wintertime. You just may want to offer it a little bit of protection. Veggies 19, 20, and 21 are parsley, cilantro, and dill. And I'm lumping them all together because they are annual herbs. However, how you grow them is significantly different. For example, parsley is one of the more difficult things to germinate. So I found that the best way to grow parsley is to actually direct sow them into seed trays, and then when you sow them, you actually pour some boiling water over the seeds. That boiling water actually helps them germinate, and they like to have cooler nights and warmer days in order to germinate. So pour some boiling water over them, and then bring your seed trays inside to room temperature, and they generally will have the highest rate of germination success. Parsley loves cooler weather, and it is extremely cold hardy. It will easily take temperatures down to 10 degrees unprotected and survive. I've gotten down to 14 degrees out in my garden in the wide open, and the parsley only took a little bit of leaf browning, and then I just hit it with some fish emulsion, and within a week or two, it completely grew back nice, new, lush green leaves for harvest. It is actually more susceptible to bolting and going to seed in the heat than it is to damage in the cold. It is an amazing herb. Cilantro, on the other hand, is like an extreme version of parsley. Cilantro is absurdly prone to bolting in even the slightest amount of warm weather, and it's 84 degrees today, and I'm actually concerned that it is harming my cilantro plants. I can only grow cilantro in the southeast in the winter, so it's one of those things that I actually look forward to winter for because I just love cilantro. Now, while parsley does take a little bit of greening on the leaves when you get into the teens Fahrenheit, cilantro just laughs it off. I'm pretty sure this is hardy to 0 degrees Fahrenheit. I've never had an instance where my cilantro has gotten injured by the cold. It loves the cold weather. The challenge to growing cilantro is getting your soil temperatures low enough to where they'll actually germinate. So it's actually difficult for me to germinate cilantro in my garden because our soil temperatures tend to stay too warm until the actual winter. So this cilantro actually came up from last year's crop because I let it go to seed, and and reseed the ground. That's how I have the best luck germinating cilantro here. I just let nature do it for me. So about 2 weeks ago, we had a prolonged cold spell where it was way below temperature for like 10 days straight, and that is when the cilantro germinated on me. Since then, I sowed more cilantro seeds directly into the ground. It's been 10 days, and finally, I'm getting a little bit of germination on one of the plants. Because it's been so warm here, we had a nice big warm up, it's actually slowed down the germination process. So if you love cilantro, it loves the cold. Remember that. And then there's dill. For the life of me, I can't seem to figure out why dill never makes these lists of cold hardy plants. It is frost tolerant. It is freeze tolerant, but it's like nobody knows about it. I've been growing dill every single winter in my garden for at least 4 or 5 years, and I have a lot of success. Now, my dill does start to take damage when we start dipping down into the 20 to 25 degree Fahrenheit range. It will get a little bit of burn, but generally speaking, it grows back. So for that reason, I always like to make sure that I have multiple dill plants growing, because by the time they get battered by hard freeze after hard freeze throughout the course of the winter, generally speaking, I will lose about half my crop. So if I were to plant 6 plants right now in November, chances are by the time March rolls around, I'll only have 3 left, and a couple of them will just take so much damage that they won't be able to muster up the strength to grow. So it is good to have multiple plants. Now that being said, I also never cover my dill. So if I were to cover it, I'm sure it would do a lot better. So I sowed a row of dill in my garden a little over a week ago, and they're just starting to germinate. You're seeing little dill seedlings spring up all over the place. So that's going to be my first row. I'm also going to sow a little bit more within a couple of weeks because I want to have some backup plants in case we get a particularly rough winter. However, I do expect most of my dill plants to survive into the spring. Veggie number 22 is garlic. Garlic is by far one of the most cold hardy things that you can grow in your garden. Period. You can grow them all the way down to zone 3, and it will overwinter in your garden if you mulch them properly. Now for me here in zone 8A North Carolina, I'm not even going to plant my garlic for probably another 3 weeks. I want to wait until late November. And that's because I just received my garlic bulbs in the mail, and I like growing hardneck varieties, and hardneck varieties need a lot of chill. I could grow softnecks more easily here, but I can buy softneck all year in the grocery store, and I just like these stronger flavored garlics. So a trick that you can use to grow them even in warm climates is to take this brown paper bag that has some breathability holes put in it. These are from Baker Creek, by the way. They come shipped to me in this bag, and then I leave it in my vegetable drawer, the humidity crisper, not the freezer. You leave it in your veggie drawer for about a month, and then once this gets a month of chill on it, I will plant it out into my garden, and that's going to be like being in a much colder zone where it's easier to grow garlic. So no matter where you are, you can find varieties of garlic that will grow well for you. Keep that in mind, and just because you're in a warm climate doesn't mean that you can't grow hardneck garlic. Just use that refrigerator trick, and if you want to know exactly how to plant garlic, I will link to a video down in the video description that shows you a complete guide on planting garlic. And finally, veggies numbers 23 and 24 are bunching onions and leeks. These are all members of the cold hardy allium family, and these are some of the easiest to grow things that you will grow in your winter garden. Let's start with bunching onions. Now these are green onions. These are not bulbing onions. Bulbing onions need to be planted later in the winter here because you need them to begin the bulbing process when days are at maximum length in the summer. So for that reason, we can't grow a bulbing onion just yet. It's a little bit too early. But the bunching onions that we only harvest for the green tops, we can grow these all winter long because we're not eating the bulb. And that is what you see right here. All of these onions are bunching onions. They are not harvested for the bulb. They are harvested for the green tops only. And I have been growing these for years in my winter. I have never had them take any damage. And if they do get any kind of burn, all you need to do is just cut off the greens and then hit them with a higher nitrogen fertilizer, and they will grow right back on you. They are one of the easiest, lowest maintenance things that you will ever grow. They basically have no pests and no disease. So unless you're going to get down to an incredibly cold temperature where they may benefit from a little bit of cover, there's really not much that you're going to have to do do with any of these bunching onions. Ditto with the leeks. Leeks are probably the easiest thing I grow in my garden, period. I grow them 365 days a year. They are tolerant to heat and they are tolerant to cold as long as you make the proper variety selections. Now, here in Zone 8A, North Carolina, we're lucky that I can get away with growing this variety of leek, King Richard, all year long. This will easily stand out in your winter garden down to Zone 7, maybe even more, and it does have a pretty good bolt tolerance, so I can actually let it stand in my garden all summer long as well. So I can just plan out periodic waves of the leeks throughout any time of the year to give me a harvest of leeks. However, that being said, if you live in an extremely cold climate, you can grow the variety Blue Soleil's. That's an heirloom leek that can stand in Zone 5 in snowpack and not take any kind of damage. You would have to plant them earlier in the fall so they get to maturity before the snow starts falling, but then once they're mature, they'll just sit out in your garden indefinitely all winter like they're in a big chiller, and then anytime you need them, you just go out and you cut the leeks that you want and you cook them however you want them. And if you were to live in a place with more extreme summers, like say you live in Vegas or Phoenix or something like that, you may need to look for a more bolt tolerant variety of leek or grow them under shade cloth to keep them artificially cool during the heat of the summer. Again, succession planting is what you want to do when it comes to leeks, because you don't want to have 400 leeks mature for you all at once that you can't do anything with. So right here I have some leeks that I planted last spring that made it all throughout summer that I can harvest whenever I want. Then I have some leeks over here that went in the ground a couple of months after those leeks, so they will be ready for harvest soon. Then I have another wave of leeks that I have planted in with my brassicas right here, and these will be probably ready sometime in the early middle of winter. And then out on my sunroom, I have a 6-pack of leeks that just germinated for me. They're coming up, and these will be ready to transplant out into my garden probably within the next 3 to 4 weeks or so. So these will be ready come the end of winter or the beginning of spring. So like I said, it's very important that you plant out small waves of leeks periodically every few weeks. That way you don't have so many leeks that you don't know what to do with and then none. Now that you know everything that I'm growing in my garden throughout the winter, what do we do about the folks in colder zones where it's just too cold for all of these things to be growing out in the open all winter long and survive? Well, for you, if you have raised bed gardens like I do, I strongly suggest that you build some type of very inexpensive PVC hoop structure on top of them. And I'll make sure to link to my playlist down in the video description below that has all of my DIY hoop structure builds. These are incredibly easy and cheap to build. Anybody can do it, and you don't need any special skills. All you need is some PVC electrical conduit and some conduit clamps, and I have all of those things linked in my Amazon storefront for your convenience, except for the PVC conduit that you can buy at Lowe's or Home Depot by the 10-foot stick. Really easy to source. Now, the way these hoop structures work is twofold. They do two things for you. When you cover them, they will keep the frost off of the plants. Now, they will still get cold inside at night and may freeze through, but what I found is if you block the frost from forming on the leaves, it's actually that frost formation that causes a lot of the cells in the leaves to rupture and causes a lot of that damage. So even if the structures freeze through, not having a direct frost on them really does a lot to increase their cold hardiness. Also, these structures will prevent your soil from freezing, and it's the soil freezing that really causes a lot of problems with vegetables. If your soil freezes, there's really nothing you can do. The roots will freeze through, and that's really when the plants can die. So, because you're going to put some kind of cover on it, like greenhouse plastic if you live in a very cold place, or agricultural fabric if you live in a marginally cold place, what that's going to do is, during the day, it's going to trap all of the sunlight in there, and it's going to warm up all of that soil. So even when it gets cold at night, because it's going to heat up so much during the day, the soil is always going to stay workable throughout the year. And that is what's going to allow you to grow things like carrots and beets and radishes and turnips and other cold crops all throughout the winter long, even in locations where the ground would otherwise freeze and be unworkable out in the open in the middle of winter. And for those of you in cold climates, I strongly suggest you check out that cold protection playlist that I have linked down in the video description, because I show you how to use things like these big pickle barrels and other jugs full of water and incandescent outdoor rated Christmas lights to add a ton of warmth to your plants during the winter, and you can grow things that you never previously thought imaginable. And that right there are 24 veggies that you can still plant in November that I'm planting right now, and I urge you to do so as well. Even if you don't think you can grow these things in your garden throughout the winter, please give it a try, because you may be surprised what you find, and hopefully some of the tips that I gave you over the course of this video will help you along the way. So everybody, I sure hope you found this video helpful. If you did, please make sure to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and please ring that notification bell so you're notified when I release more videos like these. If you're curious about any of the products that I use in real life in my garden, they are all linked down below in my Amazon storefront in the video description. And while you're there, check out my spread shop for custom merch if you want to support the channel. Thank you all so much for watching, and I hope to see all of you again on the next video.
Hey Dale, what's your favorite country in Eastern Europe? Is it Hungary? Oh, I thought so. Are you excited to get this road cone off your head today? I can't wait to get rid of this awful cone today. Come on. Okay. I've been having to hold Dale's bowl every single meal so he could actually get to his food. And then he eats so fast, I have to sometimes, okay, wait. Good boy. We have to give him breaks so he doesn't inhale. All right, buddy, this awful cone comes off this afternoon.